This is not a video that I ever planned on making, but let's do it. This is a full breakdown of my journey to financial freedom. So if you're watching this, you're likely someone who wants to retire early, or at least retire someday. But the challenge with building wealth is that we never get to see what the process looks like, which is why in this video, I'm going to be taking you through the exact journey that took me from $0 to financial freedom year by year according to my age. We'll go through my earnings before taxes, the shortcuts that helped me out, my key net worth milestones, and the thinking behind some of my biggest decisions. My hope is that by sharing this, it can play a small part in breaking down the barriers and lack of visibility that so often work against our financial progress, and can also help you think more about what you'd like your own journey to look like too. A quick note, some of you have asked to cover a bit of my earlier years leading into full-time work, so I've included timestamps below in case you'd like to jump around to whatever part you're most interested in. For the rest of us, this recap starts during my last 2 years of high school. A quick lay of the land, I come from a small town in Washington where the closest city is Seattle. During these years of my life, money is pretty tight for my family. I don't want to bore you too much with the details, but for various reasons, I'm not able to have a job, which in my opinion is a missed learning opportunity that I wish could have been different, but all that to say, my earnings these years are zero. During this time, however, my parents give me my first ever finance book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and this kicks off my interest in learning about money and in particular real estate, which becomes important later in the journey. This is also when I get my first financial shortcut. And when I say shortcut, I really mean a springboard, something that helps launch us forward and is disproportionately helpful to our goals. In this case, I managed to get into Stanford and they give me financial aid that covers nearly all of my expenses. For comparison, I would have had to pay more for our local community college, so this is an absolute game changer because it means that I can go to school without taking on any debt. My college years are especially formative. Firstly, I start to earn money for the very first time. I pick up a job teaching kids gymnastics where I make about $5,000 a year. This side hustle is something that I continue every year of school. In my very last year of college, I pick up an internship which pays $15,000 for the summer. Secondly, I also for the very first time in my life actually see the kind of wealth that I had only ever read about before in things like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or the Wall Street Journal. On campus, there's old money, new money, academic wealth. My family builds real estate, imports these or manufactures those. All different types of stories of building and ownership that really opened my eyes to the full scale of what wealth can look like and how people make it. You see, before this, the richest person that I knew was a doctor. Well off, but not unfathomably rich. The type of story that you hear about from your parents and they tell you if you go to a good school, get good grades, get a good job, and save up your money, you can get there too. It might take a while, but you can get there too. And these new stories that I'm hearing, they're in a completely different realm and use a completely different process. And that opens my eyes to a new perspective on money. After finishing my degree, I decide no more school for me and I head into the real world, at which point I blow everything left in my bank account on an apartment, furniture, and my car, resetting my finances to zero while I look for a full-time job. Later that year, I finally find one, and at 22, I begin working for a startup as an analyst where my salary is $75,000 per year. Now, this was relatively low for the tech industry and Bay Area at the time, with many people I knew making 30%, 40% more. However, along with my salary, I'm also given an equity grant, which is essentially the option to buy stock in that private company at a fixed price. These grants are intended to sweeten the deal a bit and make up for the lower salaries and higher risk of working at a startup, with the hope that someday the price of these shares will increase meaningfully if the startup does well. This year, I also pick up a few side hustles where I bring in an extra $20,000, and I also hit some big financial milestones. I make my first ever investments into some standard index funds through a personal brokerage account, as well as my company's 401k plan, and I also save up an emergency fund. In total, I'm putting a bit under half of my take-home pay towards investments and savings. The following year, when I'm 23, I managed to get a 6% pay increase to $80,000 per year, and I keep my side hustles going steady. I increase, though, my savings rate and put about half of my take-home pay towards investments and savings. The next year after that, I'm promoted to a senior analyst role and I get a 6% increase to $85K. Side hustles and savings continue at the same rate. At 25, I get another promotion into my first management role where I get my biggest increase yet at this company. It's a 12% pay raise that brings my salary up to $95,000 a year. This year, though, I decide I need a break from the side hustles, but luckily, my work starts a bonus program, which allows me to make an extra $10,000. Because this bonus is heavily discretionary and based on personal performance and broader economic conditions, I include this under side hustle earnings too because it was never typical or guaranteed. Two other big things happened this year. So first, I hit my first $100K in savings and investment, and second, I realize that I have an important choice to make. So I remember those examples from school of ownership, of risk and reward, of building something that goes outside of the traditional 9-to-5 path. And I realized that I'm at an inflection point. So I can either continue down the road that I'm on now, climbing the ladder and saving away 50% of my income, putting it into fully passive investments like index funds, and really letting time do most of the heavy lifting for me. Or I can start to dip my toes into investments where I'm the one doing more, if not most of the heavy lifting, but can potentially build up my wealth faster. Things like real estate, starting a business, or researching and investing in individual companies. At the extremes, if I continue along what we'll call Path A, I'll probably be able to hit financial freedom in my mid to late 30s because I'm saving pretty aggressively and earning more and more each year. But if I switch gears and pour my life savings into Path B now, there is a chance I can get there way sooner, even before my 30s. There's also a chance that I lose everything and enter that decade with nothing if things go wildly wrong. I want to pause here and say that there's no right or wrong approach here. There are so many factors that go into our financial decisions, our families, our health, what we even want our own future life to look like. So this is not me trying to tell you what path you should choose or what your risk tolerance should look like. That is something that only you can decide. I'm just sharing the decisions that I made and the reasoning behind them, and hopefully seeing that thought process is helpful for you as you think about the paths that you want to take. One thing about me is that I'm actually a generally risk-averse person, so I decide to carve out a path somewhere in the middle. I plan to keep the amount that I have in my index funds so that they can keep growing, and I make a promise to never touch the money that's in there. But for any future earnings that I put away towards my investments, instead of putting all of that money towards index funds as I have been, I'll instead split it up and start to put a portion towards higher effort, more active, but riskier investments, essentially using that extra money to take a few chances on myself. Best case scenario, something works out and I'm able to shorten my time to financial freedom. Worst case scenario, I'll still be contributing towards my retirement at a very healthy rate and risk level, so I'm not putting that retirement on the line at all. If none of my bigger swings work out, I can still learn a lot, and I'll carry those learnings with me the next time I try, and really for the rest of my life. So this is the plan that I decide to move forward with. So heading into 26, I'm making $105,000 a year, plus I get a $15K bonus. Later this year though, COVID hits and I move back home to be with my family for lockdown. A few months after my move though, I see my dream house on the market. And it's probably not what you think. It's a 50-year-old multifamily home that hasn't been updated since it was built in the 70s, but it has a ton of potential. It has a view, it's close to shopping, dining, I mean everything that you could want. The only problem is that it's about $100K more than what I can afford. I won't bore you with the details, but after sitting for months on the market and rejecting multiple of the offers that I put in, the owner finally agrees to sell it to me at a price that I can afford. So this becomes my first ever fully active investment, and I begin renovating the property immediately, taking it down to the studs to eventually bring the units from this to this. And while all of that is happening, my company goes public, and the value of the equity that I got years ago, it skyrockets by $100,000, bringing my net worth to about $300K. I sell all of it immediately, and I split that money up according to my new plan. Some goes to index funds, some goes to other more stable individual companies, and the rest goes towards my renovation project. Then at 27, I switch companies and join a completely different startup with a new role as a senior manager. For the first time, I actually negotiate my pay, and I'm able to get a 27% increase to $135,000. There's no bonus program yet with this new job, and even though I managed to finish up the renovations and bring in tenants, I'm still paying out of pocket to cover a gap between the mortgage and the rent, which my side hustles are helping out with, but I don't bring in any extra net income this year. Even though I do get a big pay jump, I also do my best to avoid lifestyle creep, putting away at this point well over 50% of my pay towards investments. On paper though, the finished renovation increases my property value by about $400K, bringing my net worth to about $750,000. Heading into 28, some exciting things happen. So firstly, my salary increases 11% to $150K. Secondly, my work begins a bonus program where I earn an additional $15K on top of that. And thirdly, after just about 2 years of losing money on my properties, I break even and even manage to turn a small profit. It's just $5K, so nothing huge, but it is a start that gets me feeling so much more optimistic about my progress. And then with property values continuing to increase and the growth of my investments in the stock market, I hit the $1 million milestone. So again, I'm not bringing in much money at this point, and most of this value is locked up in real estate, so I'm certainly not feeling cash rich, but on paper, I'm making good progress. The following year, at 29, I'm promoted to a director role and my salary increases by 23% to $185,000, plus I earn a $15K bonus. I managed to profit another $15,000 through my properties and related side hustles this year, which is a big improvement, while I also continue to maintain my cost of living and at this point am investing again well over 50% of my pay. And then at the very end of this year, I hit my personal financial freedom target, which is $1.25 million. Now, if you've made it this far, there are a few learnings that I hope can be helpful to you on your own journey. The first is that the first 100K is truly the hardest, but the faster you can get to this milestone, the faster that your money can start to snowball. And the sooner that you can afford, monetarily and mentally, to take calculated risks if that's what you want, like starting businesses or getting into real estate, without worrying that a single project might set you back to zero. It took me just about 4 years to get here, but after that is when my finances took off. The second is that if you want to hit financial freedom, regardless of your timeline, avoiding lifestyle creep is the easiest step that you can take. And that's because lifestyle creep creates a moving target where the more you spend, the bigger and bigger your net worth has to become in order to compensate for it. I managed to keep my living expenses flat, even as I earned more, which meant that my finish line stayed the same, but I was moving faster and faster towards it. The third is that growth is not linear, it comes in waves. And even though it might not feel like you're making progress in the moment, consistently doing the work, the saving, the investing, that is what lets you take advantage of and ride the next wave when it eventually does come. While it all worked out in the end, there are a couple things that I wish I could have told myself to do differently. The first is to not be afraid to negotiate, because you don't get paid what you're worth, you get paid what you're willing to ask for. And the more time that goes by without negotiating, the more and more money that you're missing out on. I didn't negotiate in my first role because I thought I had no negotiating power. But as I later found out through my colleagues, I could have easily gotten a larger salary and equity grant, which would have made a huge difference for my early savings. The second is to be willing to move around. My biggest jumps in my pay came from when I switched companies and not from an annual review or internal promotion. Now, I'm not advocating for jumping to every new opportunity that comes your way, but when you reach a point where you're no longer learning new skills and your salary has stayed flat, even though you're still putting in all of that effort, switching companies is sometimes the only way that you're going to be able to get paid what you're truly worth. I stayed on far too long at my first company and didn't realize how much money I was losing out on just by staying in place. So this has been my journey to financial freedom, and I hope that you found it helpful. I always love to hear where you're at and what you're working on next, so let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.